And so now we get an opportunity to be with someone who's going to help us connect to that past, to that ancestry, because Latinos also believe, you know, that our ancestors walk with us. And I wanted to show you just a quick slide on this. Connect to the power of our ancestry. I believe that Dia de los Muertos will be another gift, this connection to our ancestors, that Latinos will give to America. The idea that, you know, we are a continuation, a legacy that is moving forward. So that's a picture of my Dia de los Muertos altar and me ready for Dia de los Muertos, which is coming up. So let's welcome Patrisia Gonzales. I do want to tell you a little bit about her because I have had the pleasure of knowing this young woman since what, Patricia? Are we into 20? How many years is it now?
1997.
1997. Oh my goodness. So this is a wonderful, incredible spirit in our community. And I met her when she was a Kellogg Fellow and I was an advisor to her class, which was an amazing experience. She's actually, you know, Latinos are a combination of indigenous people and Europeans, and we have a little bit of everything. So she really brings our traditional indigenous background, and that's one of our roots, you know, it's our foundation. She's the daughter of Kickapoo and Comanche, and how do I pronounce your third name?
Masewal.
It's beautiful. There were tribes in Mexico that, of course, immigrated. And of course, I live in Colorado. She's in Arizona. It was Mexico. So it's really our ancestral roots. She has a PhD in mass communications from the University of Wisconsin. And she's an award-winning journalist. For many years, she wrote a column called The Column of the Americas. Today, she's a professor at the University of Arizona and at Tucson. And she really promotes indigenous practices to strengthen, empower, and connect Latinos. So, Patricia, qué placer tenerte con nosotros, mujer. Gracias por su generosidad.
Thank you, Juana. So I'm going to share screen. And I don't know if I have some chat questions. So I'm hoping that when I share screen with my PowerPoint, I'll still be able to see the chat questions. See, okay, good, I can. All right, everybody, thank you. I think if I do this from beginning, though, I may not be able to see the chats. I'm going to just try this. Oh, I can, great. All right, so good morning, everyone. It's still morning here in Arizona. I want to do a land acknowledgement that I live here on the land of the Tohono and the Pascuyaki Nations. I also want to acknowledge my elders, because part of the land and part of what we're going to be talking about today is connectedness. And part of the ancestral knowledge that we have actually comes from the places that gave us, that our cultures evolved from, the relationships with the peoples, a long lineage, all the way to the stars, really, because we are made of the stars. And these are my Kickapoo, Comanche, Nawa, and Nawa elders. So we are northern, we are native, my family is a Native American peoples who went into Mexico and married in with the Nawa in the Chichimeca area and the Huasteca area, also Huastec people, and then came back to the United States. So I have a unique position. And these are all the elders that I've worked with. These are all my grandparents, great grandmas, Native. All my grandmothers were Native. And then these are the grandparents who raised me, Nawa elders who've been my teachers. These are all Nawa elders. So I want to recognize that part of my connectedness and acknowledging the elders who I've been so fortunate to be around is that my knowledge didn't come, in isolation. It came from being within communities, from being within relationships, ceremonial relationships, relationships with the land, relationships with elders and communities. So, so part of what we're gonna, and when we talk about the idea of the power of ancestry is really, again, about the power of connectedness. And so this, and where we come from, and I know many of us are maybe on this call, and certainly in the larger national community that we call Latinx, are from many nations, and often we have lost our particular identities because we're now considered Mexican or Guatemalteco or Peruano or Puerto Rican, but we have original territories. And so this is the land I grew up in. This is also my altar here in Tucson, and this is where our ombligos are buried. And so this is where at least a dozen belly buttons are buried in my family on our land in Texas, where I grew up on the banks of in Fort Worth. So I want to ask you, do you know what that phrase means? ¿Y dónde está tu ombligo? It's something that it's an old phrase, and and also, do you know the phrase ¿Y dónde está tu abuela? And can you tell me what that answers? In the chat. Let's see if anybody can tap into the chat. So I'm going to see here if I can see the chat. I cannot see the chat. Let's see.
If you hit the chat button, I'm seeing it all on the side, Patricia.
Yeah. Something about sharing PowerPoint is not allowing me.
Yeah, that's the problem with this particular function. Jackie, could you read the responses, please? My grandmother is buried on the Rio Coco in the Mexico coast in Nicaragua. And after she died, a lot of her traditional herbs that she used to heal and stuff began growing around her grave.
Oh, how beautiful. Oh, And do you know, does anybody know what "en dónde está tu ombligo," what that means? Did anybody respond to that?
Some of them are in Spanish.
Okay. I can't, maybe if I minimize my,
Well, Jackie can read them to you. That's what we've been doing.
It says as Aguazarca Tamanzun Chales SLP. And I apologize because I probably butchered that.
Luis Portesi.
Someone said connections to lineage. I'm from Zamora, Michoacan, Mexico. Where do you connect to Earth? Oh, mi abuela y Mirio está en el cielo. Oh, where is your umbilical cord buried? Means my origin, your roots.
Okay, great. So I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to have a couple of those chats where I'll have to ask someone to read them to me because I couldn't.
I wanted to acknowledge someone said that her ancestors are in Ecuador.
Okay. So ¿y dónde está tu ombligo means where are you from? Or where is, literally, where is your belly, where is your belly button buried? Because it's such a traditional practice still to, when a child is born, to bury their ombligo or to offer it somehow to the Mother Earth or to the natural world. And it was to also help you to come home and to know your center and where you're from. And there's a lot of sacred teachings around the belly button in traditional medicine in Mexico, and I'm going to get to that at the end. We'll end with that question again. And the question, ¿dónde está tu, and so it also means who are your people? So it's very native to say that, very indigenous to say that question. But also the question, ¿dónde está tu abuela? Actually refers to our hidden ancestry. And very often it was the hidden Black abuela. But it could also be our hidden Indian, native, indigenous abuela, because of the way that race was constructed in the Americas, and the concept of mestizaje was used to de-indigenize our communities. And so very often then there was shame around our ancestors that were the original peoples, because the African abuelas were from the original peoples of Africa that of course were the slaves. And so that shows you some of that hidden discrimination that was one of the reasons that people hid who they were in order to survive. Sometimes they hid, sometimes they, you know, I want to recognize that we come from so many peoples. So this umbrella term, even that doesn't show the complexity of who we are, and that we're really an alliance of, when we come together, we're an alliance of many peoples with many teachings and many cultures. So we're going to, yes, beginning action. So this, so we're going to now, we're going to talk more about all of these topics, but this is actually, I happen to love the images from the Hubble telescope. And this is actually showing the birth of two twin stars, and it's called the stellar nursery. So there's actually a nursery in the universe, okay? And so many of our teachings actually say that we come from the stars. That's certainly a teaching that my grandpa, great-grandpa taught me. And so when we think about where do our prayers go to, how do we connect to the universe, and where is our lineage? Truly, our lineage, as I mentioned, is something that goes all the way to the universe, because science has already proven that we are made of the same thing as stars. And so a lot of those teachings that we may be yearning for, sometimes when we start to think about, you know, our origins and how to connect to the teachings of our ancestors, that is what makes our ancestry, is those relationships. It's really a yearning to connect with the way our ancestors understood the cosmos and the spiritual world, and how it can manifest in our daily world. So we're going to, let's see, let me just check my notes here. Okay, no, I'm going back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, in your chat, before we do a little prayer to begin and calling in our ancestors, please in the chat, and some of you have already begun to do this, please name someone that you'd like to call in, one of your ancestors, a grandma, an auntie. If you don't have someone because, you know, perhaps you don't know your grandparents, that happens sometimes, and you can name an elder that you know in the living world, but or that's gone on, or you can call in an ancestor from you know, we have many leaders who have now walked on and are in the spirit world. So let's name them and call them in, and name them and recognize them for the gifts that they have left us. And if you want to say something about them very briefly, about why they're important to you or why you want to recognize them right now, you can type that into the chat.
We've had a few people say my mom Elsie, mi mamá, my grandparents, Betty, Ramon, and Pedro, mi abuela, Ariela Villarreal Martinez, mi abuelito, Jose Angel Cervantes Rodriguez, Celsa Santana, my mother, my dad, mis abuelos, Adelina, my Apache grandmother, for her strength and teaching of endurance and perseverance, Grace and Ben, who brought me into this world, my mom, Dolita Bordas, Margarita Bordas, Maria Bordas, mis abuelos y bisabuelos, Irma Cruz Diaz and Ramon Diaz, abuelos, Debbie Guarigata, mis abuelos, mi abuelito, my grandfathers, Jose and Martin, my father, Jose Laureano Villegas, mi abuelos, and especially my father, Hector. Roman, mi mama is Elvira. I apologize if I'm pronouncing these wrongs. Mi abuela, Juana. Ma de Jesus, Gabriela, Nicolas, Angel, abuelos. Mi abuelita, who I never met. Mis abuelos and bisabuelos, mi abuela Teresa. Romulo Perez, my grandfather, my grandparents, my great-grandfather. Bolivar Pagan, who worked for equality for U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico through statehood, a mission that I continue to carry on to this day. And my abuelita, is it Candida Del Val, who is a deeply spiritual woman. My dad Gonzalo, my grandma Terry, Miguel Montoya, and my uncle and grandmother. I apologize if I missed any.
Thank you so much. That is so beautiful. Los abuelos, los tatas. I'm so fortunate. I was raised with my grandparents, and in that honor now that you have called them in, we're going to please take your candles, and we're going to light our candle now to unite our thoughts and their names and what they stood for in our lives, in our communities, among our peoples. And we're going to light that now. I'm going to light one candle here that unites all of our so let's take a moment to just, you know, to take a breath and to really, in our hearts, put that feeling and those good memories and all of their actions that we carry in our being into the light of that candle. So let's unite our thoughts and our, um, our actions from this point forward with the light. And so now I have lit this candle. And so now we're going to do, actually, if you hopefully you have some paper because you've been taking notes throughout these 2 days, but get out a piece of paper because I'm going to do a little, we're going to do a practice where we will now connect through our breath and do a meditation to see, to again go inward and honor the ancestors as we recognize that we're calling them in, and I'll be saying some words. And so I'll ask you to write something afterwards to see what comes out after you ask this question that I'm going to pose, some questions, and just allow yourself to do free writing to see what comes out of you, out of your being, your heart, your connection with your abuelos, your ancestors, the people that are, you know, above, you know, upward in the spirit world, in the sacred place of rest, in the sacred place now of light. And so I'm just going to ask you to take some breaths, and I'm sorry, I'm going to, looking for my phone here. So, well, somebody will have to time me if it goes over 5 minutes, okay?
I'll do that, Patricia.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a breath and just breathe and just allow your breath to come in, and just, you know, don't worry about time or to-do list. This is your time to connect in your body, in your breath, and to connect with the moment in this present through your breath. And now, I'd like you to close your eyes and relax, or focus on the candle if you would like to look into the candle. And just continue to breathe, and breathe through your heart. And remember a beautiful time with one of your elders or an elder in your community, an ancestor that has gone on. And just hold that feeling that brings us great joy, expansiveness, lightness. Hold that feeling in your heart and allow it to fill your heart, your rib cage, your solar plexus, down to your belly button and below your belly button. Allow that feeling to relax you as you expand into that moment that your body can go back to, your spirit can go back to. Even if it may bring us a little sadness, there's the joy of having lived it, of having been with them. And now we'd like to just offer these words to the four winds that carry all of life, to the above and the below, to all of us around us, to the life givers and the life makers. And we ask that we give thanks to the direction where the ancestors live, the place where there's the deepest of knowledge. And we ask to connect our hearts and our minds, our being in our bodies and our places where we live, our feet in the ground, to connect all of those things that connect us to the earth, that we connect to our ancestors now, that we call them in to help us, guide us in this next hour, to clear our minds and to help us see differently, think differently, see clearly, think clearly, let go, and let go of what is no longer useful, and hold on to something that can help us go forward. And so we thank you for your presence, that we know you have our back, that whenever we call out to you, wherever you are, we know that you can help us in a way that may seem unusual, maybe syncretic, synchronicity, serendipity. But we know that all of life and your presence can help us. And so we ask for a little help now. We ask for a little bit of knowledge. We ask for a little bit of clarity. We ask to know what to do, what should we do. And if we have a question about something, we ask that you bring us that guidance about how to respond, how to create, undo those wrinkles in the universe, in this life, in this chaotic life, in this disordered life. We ask for some order. We ask for some balance. And so I want you to really feel that presence of all the people that have gone before you. And let's just listen. What are they trying to say? And so now we're going to come back into this physical world. And I want you to just slowly, if your eyes have been closed, to just kind of focus back on your candle and the light and come into this physical presence and focus on the light a little bit. And take out a piece of paper, your piece of paper, and just start writing and see, did you get some sort of message as you were breathing and listening? And if not, just start writing and just, and write and allow your ancestors to write through you. We're just going to take a 1-minute exercise on that, a 1-minute practice. And if you want, just don't even pick up your pen. Sometimes that's an effective way to, and one of you can time us for a minute.
Okay. Okay, Patricia.
Okay, so thank you. All right, everyone. So we're going to go to the next slide. So that's for you to keep, okay, for your own personal message. And I want to tell you a story. Actually, I should have kept that slide going, but my stepdad just passed, and he raised me. My mother and my father were married for 52 years, and we were really struggling with him, and he had Alzheimer's dementia. He passed in April, and I went out and I prayed to my great-grandpa, who was a traditional healer, was a bone setter, a curandero, did ceremony, and to my grandpa, who also doctored, and I really talked to them, and I said, Mama, I'm really worried about Mama. and that she might go with them because there's so much stress right now, and please help us, please help us. And my stepdad, my dad, he went mercifully very quickly. And in this time of COVID, you know, it wasn't easy, but we actually were allowed to go into his room and hold his hand before he went into a coma. And no one was getting that. And I know that the spirit world heard my prayer, you know, and I was also praying to creation, and I do a lot of different prayers. I'm also Buddhist, and so I know that the power of prayer. And so when we think about connecting to the power of our ancestors, it's really being able to have a talk with life, and understand that all of what's gone before us, every action, every thought, it goes back into creation, and then we can connect to that. And Juana mentioned Dia de los Muertos. It's actually Dia de los Animas. It's translated as Dia de los Muertos, but it's actually in an indigenous concept, it's Dia de los Animas. We're actually in that period now. Originally, this was the period. It was before October 31st and November 1st and 2nd. Actually, now it's synchronized to All Souls Day, and it starts all around the 29th in some communities, in an indigenous and ancestral communities. But this period actually was a period in the Nahua ceremonial calendar, and it was a time when the fruits were falling from the tree, and people would go out on the top of their roofs, and they would make music and bang, drum, and they would call out loudly to their ancestors to honor them and recognize them. And that's the original Dia de los Muertos. So this actually is a very old ceremony that is rooted, at least in Mexico. I don't know about other places. And so that's the period that we're at right now. So you're actually aligned with the ceremonial cycle by doing the small act that we did right now of honoring our ancestors. And so for a lot of us, we don't know who our ancestors are. And we don't know how to connect to the prayers or what their desires for, but some of us do. Some of us do connect. Some of us do remember our grandparents. And I think part of the challenge of connecting to our ancestry is what do we carry forward, and what do we bring forward? And what are the gaps and the losses, the parts that have been disappeared? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we progress. But a lot of us, we also don't recognize a lot of times that our ancestors are also Mother Earth. Our ancestors are the stars, as I mentioned. They're everything that's alive. All the elements are alive, and everything has a spirit and as a living being in the way that our original teachings taught us as indigenous peoples all over the world where we originally emerged.
Patricia, can you turn up your volume or speak louder? Thank you. I had a request.
Okay. Yeah, let me see here. I'll have to get out of here to do that. Yeah, I'm at 100.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
We've had just a couple people say they can't hear.
Okay.
And while we're paused real quick, I want to read a comment. A couple of the folks are saying they're crying. And someone else said, I'm crying too. I am not sure what just happened, but they told me that I need to learn patience and they will help me, that I will feel them more and more.
Well, let's take a moment. I didn't want to intrude on anybody's privacy, but if anybody would like to say something right now through the chat, we're happy to hear it and honor it.
I too am crying.
So let's ask what's underneath that pain for you. Or is it joy? It could be joy too, you know. A lot of us that are older, we live with some sadness as we go older because we lose people. And of course, this is a time of great loss. We haven't experienced such loss in a long time, but you know, we all did. We are survivors of loss. We are survivors of people dying in mass without the appropriate medical care, you know, or without being able to respond to an illness introduced into our societies when the Europeans came into our territories. So we're actually all survivors of that from a long time ago. And it's a great it's an unfortunate but real human lesson that we're living as peoples from so many different communities now.
There's a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. How often should we do this? I feel like I have neglected them.
You could do it once a week if you're really disciplined.
Mhm.
Every day you can talk to your abuelos. Every day you can, say a little prayer for them or say hello, whoever they are, certainly your family. Our prayers go to everybody. I think that transcends all our traditions, that our prayers are immediate and will arrive where they need to arrive. And whatever
This is
tradition
a
that we have.
beautiful one. I am reminded that I am never alone and that
Mm.
my ancestors continue to walk with me, some in recent dreams, some bringing clarity to old dreams.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. That's so beautiful. So we're already accomplishing what that title of that Juana set out for the name of the talk, which is to connect to the power of your ancestry. Yeah. So this is such a beautiful thing. If you want to read this book by Greg Cajete, he's a wonderful Native author. He's one of my mentors, and he's an educator, but he was also trained as a biologist. And he has many books, so if you can look up any of his books, but this one was about Indigenous education. It has a lot about healing and art and creativity. All his books have some kind of curriculum, but one of the things he talks about, and I've written a lot about the role of elders, and what happens when we don't have elders in our community, because they provide us with accountability. We know how to act around our elders. We know not to talk back to them. We know to honor them. We know we need to act a certain way. And now, guess what? We are becoming the elders, right? Juana was laughing. We've known each other 23 years. I'm in my 60s now, and people look to me, and we have ceremonies to honor elderhood. We have ceremonies to honor our ancestors. Those are indigenous ceremonies. And so the beautiful thing, and why I think we have so much love for our ancestors, especially when we talk about our grandparents and our parents, and our tios and our bisabuelas, our tiabuelas, our tiabuelos, is that they really represent an accumulation of time, of experience. They represent 300 years of memory. And every time an elder passes, it's really hard on us, because I think, oh, what I forgot to ask, or I can't go hang out with them anymore, or take them some food, That's how I grew up, was always being with the elders, because I was actually raised in my grandparents' house, and they had 11 kids. So I was like the 12th child. These are the kind of questions I want you to think about what were their prayers for you? What were their wishes for you? How do you respond to their sacrifice? And you can take some notes around as we're talking and just kind of jot out what happens. But one of the things that maybe I thought I had put it in this slide is that the question becomes, how are you going to be an ancestor? What kind of ancestor are you going to become? And that is, it's actually a phrase from the 7th Generation Funds. I want to honor, they do a whole campaign on being a good ancestor. So I want to just want to talk about some of the pain we have. And who is the we? And how do we get here? The we, the Latinx community. It's so complex. We come from these different places. So a lot of you have mentioned being from other parts of the Americas. Maybe you came also from other parts and maybe your ancestors came from another place in the world to the Americas. And maybe some of you never left. Some of your ancestors never left, and you're the original peoples of this continent. And you may have all of those people. And certainly we have our African relatives who were forced to come here. And so that's where that question comes from, ¿Dónde está tu abuela? Because they would be hidden. They would be hidden in the kitchen. They would be hidden in the bedroom, because people didn't want to see that they might have an Afro-Peruvian or a Afro-Mestiza or an Afro-Mexican grandmother in their family. They would try to hide that if they could. And that happened. That's a reality. But this is just showing you the tribes in Coahuila at the time in the colonial period. This is a site I gave you because for a lot of people who are Mexican, these have a lot of the, when people start to understand who are we, and we know that at one point that our ancestors were native, but we don't know how they are. Always the starting place is to go back. What was the original pueblos that your family was from?
Patricia, could you hit slideshow?
Sorry.
Yes, I appreciate it.
Okay, there we go. And so you see, this is right here, just in the state of Coahuila. And here, this is in the state of Nuevo León. And so he's talking about how these are and what he says is, and of course, this has been documented by a lot of researchers, in Nuevo León alone, there were 200 different tribes. There were 30 different languages spoken in the state of Tamaulipas. In Texas, there were hundreds and hundreds of indigenous communities and peoples that were distinct. And the official story is, well, you know, they died. Well, they were exterminated. They were terminated. Well, actually, where did they go? Well, they became the Mexican. And so what happens is, and he says it very articulated, but this is something we say in our scholarship, is they lost their specific identity as indigenous peoples. But we know that a lot of our knowledge remained through our customs, through a lot around our traditional medicine. So the participant who mentioned her grandmother and how all the medicines grew around her, you know, that's that power of the natural world and the spiritual teachings of traditional medicine. That's actually how a lot of our indigenous knowledge of Mesoamerica remained, at least in the areas of Mesoamerica, and most likely also in the Andes and other parts of the Americas. It remained through our agriculture and through our and so what are our foods, right? Now our foods, it remains through our foods and through our plant knowledge, through our healing knowledge. And so I created this concept. I was trying to play with that concept of, actually, I forgot to mention, I didn't write the anachronism for it. I call it post-tribal stress disorder, or PIST, PTSD, PTSD, post-tribal stress disorder. And it is this feeling of the gaps. It's the feeling of not the disconnection, of being disordered, of not knowing that we have these our undocumented indigeneity, and that includes our undocumented indigeneity from our African relatives also, because Africa is its own indigenous continent. And so I love this by Dr. Inés Hernández Avila, and she talks about how the history needs a big limpia, because part of that limpia is so much has been untold and unrecorded, and maybe that we will never be able to know the details. So we have to then, so one of the things to recognize in some of our traditional medicine is that, yes, there is a susto from this. There is grief and there is sorrow. And now, you know, I just saw somebody talking about clinical loneliness. Well, that's what limpias recognize when people talk about doing our spiritual cleansings. It recognizes loneliness as an imbalance. It recognizes envidia as imbalance. It recognizes sorrow and grieving. And so this idea of depression is actually something, a new concept. We had concepts about our emotions that helped us to recognize what was happening to us. And so so part of this, then, this idea of the PIST is to really, I'll go back, is to honor. It's not just about, it's about recognizing with us our disconnection and what needs to be addressed, but it's also about, not about our right to claim something, like so many, I know so many people want to return to their tribes and they want to be enrolled, but it's about building those relationships. It's about our responsibilities to our communities. It's about being there and being part of all the struggles that a community goes through. So it's really about, and it's about rites, meaning our ceremonies, our sacred knowledge, connecting to your sacred knowledge, connecting to respect, to your relationship. So it's really about, you know, then as the descendants of the original peoples of this Americas, what is your responsibility to the land, to the elements, to the atmosphere, which is what is happening with climate change. And, you know, it's a living being, and it's part of a web of life. What is our responsibility to each other, to the young people, to our elders, to the places where we are now, and how can you respond? So that's really about, when we think about, you know, that how did our grandparents live? How did our ancestors live? It's about taking those teachings into the present, wherever you're at, and then trying to fill in some of the gaps in a respectful way. So again, it's about how can you be that good ancestor when we talk about connecting to our ancestry. And so it's a journey with many levels to it, but we do need to recognize some of the steps and then think about what is possible for me in a respectful way. So how am I doing on time? Juana?
You good? You have like 23 minutes.
Okay. So
And
let's then, I'm going to try to move this. Can y'all hear me? I'm trying to get closer to the mic. Can you hear me better? Hopefully. Okay. All right. So let's think about in the chat then.
He said yes.
Okay,
yes.
good. All right. So in the chat, let's think about these questions. Well, one, would you like to, let's reflect on what I've talked about, post-tribal stress disorder. Do you feel that you've experienced some of these things? And you can just type in some comments.
Patricia, can you go back and just show the name of the books you briefly showed in the PowerPoint?
I will, but let's focus on this question.
The books are going to be there and the taping's going to be there. So if we can honor this moment, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any responses?
Today, the PTSD was evident with the crying. Yes, there has always been a feeling of disconnect to the community. Yes, when individuals do not recognize that our traditions or ceremonies are valuable to us.
Yeah. Those are real, and I think sometimes we have to just keep doing them. I think about my great-grandmothers who married into also, you know, people who had been detribalized and Mexican people, especially my grandmothers who doctored. All my grandmothers doctored, and my grandpa and my great-grandpa and my great-grandma. And when my great-grandpa passed away, my great-aunt burned his shed, which had all his, you know, the things that were important to him, including a book of his remedios. And so even our own families do that. And that was one of the ways we were controlled, was from our own families and from people in our own communities. And that is very real. And so it takes a lot of strength. So those of you who mentioned, I know you mentioned your Comanche grandma, the ability to endure, absolutely. I think about my grandmothers and how hard it is sometimes when we do hold our ceremonies. I've been treated like a witch by people that, like a family that I was part of when I was with someone, a partner, and I was treated like a witch, literally treated like a witch. And you know, that's a reality that some teachings make, that's, you know, the power of our hands, the power of being able to light a candle. That's why we were taken to the Inquisition. And so those things remain, unfortunately, in our communities. So it takes a lot of courage, and sometimes it also takes just confidence and the ability to keep doing it in your private moments over and over again with trusted, you know, ceremonies don't have to be public. Prayers, you know, we can pray at any point, we can connect at any point. And I do a lot of things just within a close circle of friends. There are things that I get to be part of as a Kickapoo. There's certain ceremonies I can be part of, but there are many ceremonies that I am not invited to, and I know it's not my place to be there. And I have great respect that only certain people should be there. And so it's not about, again, understanding, you know, when it's appropriate to do something, but certainly in your own homes, you know, you can take that time on a certain day of the week, put your prayers out, make your offerings, you know, take the time to, definitely the fire is really important in a lot of our communities that are like south of the border. You know, I think it takes the place of the actual fire, so the fire is really important. We certainly in a lot of Native ceremonies, a live fire is important, and so I think that's part of, you know, and it could be also the melding with the Catholic faith, you know, the santos and the velas from church, and that is part of that's been one of the strengths, I think, of our communities of Mesoamerica and into the Andes, is that we were very adaptable. And so you know, in many ways, there's an article by Patrisia Gonzales, it's called Indigenizing Catholicism. and she's Yaqui, and she talks about actually how the Yaquis indigenized, you know, and brought into the Yaqui, ceremonial world. And so, you know, many times actually that's, and you see that with the Pueblos also. So, and other tribes that synchronize some of their teachings with the Catholic faith. So we indigenize things, and we indigenize some plants from Europe, and they're now very, like ruda is very beloved all across the Americas, up in, you know, from Mesoamerica into the Andes. And ruda was brought from the Mediterranean, but it has even native names. Sometimes you'll find them in the botanical literature. So one of our strengths is adaptability, and the ability to take from these different cultures, but to internalize it within an indigenous way of thinking. So why don't you change your framework a little bit and look at your indigenous roots, your African history, and look at how you actually, those teachings then internalized what was sometimes forced, sometimes agreed to from European culture. And that is like inverting the framework of your experience. So now I'm going to ask this question in the chat. So what would be ways now to, in thinking through this, having gone through this workshop, what are ways to honor, you know, right ways now that you might want to go out to honor your ancestors? What's something that you can show, think about an act that shows responsibility to your ancestors and to your ancestry. Think about, please provide them in the chat, what would be a way to show respect? And what would be a way for you to establish relationality with your legacy as the descendants of the original peoples of this land that we call the Americas? And how can you be a good ancestor? So these are questions I'd like you to answer in the chat.
Someone said to claim Aboriginal on the census. I think that's a fabulous idea.
Yeah.
The more complicated we make it, the better.
Well, the census never wants to, like, you know, they've changed these, like for a while they had Latin American indigenous and, so I think it's important to do that because you actually help the numbers also of indigenous peoples, and it shows, we start to complicate that picture about you know, our presence in the Americas. My mom and I have never, we've always filled out indigenous since the 80s, 70s. Any other responses?
Yes, this one says, I want to teach my son more about his culture. I want to really start to think about what kind of ancestor I want to be, my legacy. I want to learn more about the rituals of my people. Someone said, teach our kids about our ancestors, learn to reconnect with the wisdom of the elders and practice them in public.
Mm-hmm.
Teach our kids, oh, I read that. Oh, will this work for my Italian grandparents?
Well, your Italian people, they have, oh my God, Italians have such a rich cultures. They also believe in the evil eye, you know, like, you know, we always say, oh, it's a mixture of Spanish and the mal de ojo. It wasn't just Spanish. I have a friend who's Sicilian, and she says they have the evil eye, you know, the concept of that. So we have, you know, we had our own concept here, and then they had a concept, and they were aligned, but they didn't bring it to us. We already had that concept. So they brought their concept, and it was similar. And so it's interesting how I think even in some of their Arabian countries in the Far East, the Middle East rather, they also have a similar concept. So you know,
actually, Patricia, like if you look at the Asian culture, this honoring of the ancestors is so prevalent. They actually have their ancestral altars. It really, if you go back, we all were indigenous. We all came from tribes.
Oh, yes.
And so
yeah.
that sense of connection to the past is in all cultures.
Mm-hmm. All cultures, yeah, absolutely.
Maybe one.
and they are and all our ancient cultures had an earth-based. They started off with an earth-based spirituality, So even some of the santos, you look at them, like, the different santos, you look at how they're working with certain elements. So my mother has a devotion to San Martin. She also prays to the four directions. So, I think that you're right to pray, own your right to pray in the way that's right to you. Stay responsible to your prayers and teach your children. But the most important thing is to teach each other. And this is the hard part. There are a lot of books out there now. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube. I kind of struggle with that because we learned it relationally. So try to learn it from the aunties in your community, from the elders in your community first. Because when you learn it from a book, it's more distance. And it doesn't mean those books won't serve you. But get together with each other like we just had ideas. Get into a circle. Create your circle of relations if you don't have them. Go back to your aunts and uncles and your mothers and fathers if your elders are still there. Start with your family first because that's your legacy. Sometimes it'll be the smallest of things. It'll be a small prayer, it'll be a small action. Getting up in the morning. What did your grandma do? I mean, I have all kinds of stories about the things my grandmothers did. And I saw my grandmothers do these things. I was at their feet. My earliest memory was my grandmother praying. So these are the things that you start with your family first. That's your foundation. And if you don't have that, then you go out into your communities and try to try to identify what were your original villages that your families came from. And then at least you have a legacy to that and try to learn from that community to bring it forward. So
someone made a comment that I think would be interesting for you to address. They said when they went to the Aztec ruins, they felt like an imposter. That, you know what I mean? Because we've all been colonized like many times, especially for us. We were colonized by the Spanish and then by the Western settlers. So talk a little bit about that, because we really do need to understand that our ancestors are just waiting for us to connect with them and talk to them and call them.
Yeah. I think we're so unique. I mean, many of us never left our communities. It's just that our family stayed there as the churches were built on our lands, as we lost our languages and we, became different faiths. But we didn't really go anywhere until maybe we migrated someplace. Some people migrated, but in a lot of places, people stayed in their villages. And so, that's a very real feeling. I think that's part of the PTSD or the PISSD. I always call it post-Indian stress disorder. As you develop and it's doing the acts over and over again. That's what creates culture, is to do something over and over again and be guided by elders and start to find elders in your community to help guide you. But the most important thing is for you to connect with the elements, to connect with the water, connect with the earth and the elements of the earth. Take your children into the nature, not to be afraid, how to respect nature, how to be in reciprocity with that, and listen. Take time to listen and be quiet, because we fill our minds with so much stuff, like getting on our phones at night instead of trying to take some time to breathe and connect with our bodies and what's around us. So this is the Ojo de Dios that they've called at the Hubble. And that's one of my favorite images. It's amazing how universe reflects things that this is what our elders did. They looked at the sky and they named it. And now the Hubble, astronomers look at the sky and it's a form they recognize and they name it. And so, but this is another Ojo de Dios, and we've seen many of these, and they're planted all over. They're on shrines, on roadsides, they're in our cemeteries. But that concept, actually, Ojo de Dios, doesn't really translate in the way a native concept would understand this. And so, for some of us, it might be considered God's eye, but it's actually just in one language, the Huichol language, it actually means the power to see and understand the things unknown. And that's part of what we're trying to get at here when we talk about connecting to the power of our ancestry.
Can
that's
you
what our
that again, Patricia, because it was so powerful. What does it symbolize? Say it again, because it was so powerful. I want to know.
It's written in the slide, the power to see and understand the things unknown.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I'll show you another translation related to it. And so, so when we talk about, you may have heard people talk about the medicine wheel. So in our cultures from this, meaning south, we say south meaning south of the border. Mesoamerica and the Andean cultures, we had our own representations also, and that Ojo de Dios is an example of balance. So it's a showing the exact balance of the four directions of the elements. And in our there, we have paradigms, we have models of balance that would be in our ceremonies, that are in our ceremonies. And so part of the balance is the balance with youth and elders, male and female. And the male and female isn't just men and women, it's the male and female within us. Each one of us has male and female within us. And so, so in the related concept in looking at this Ojo de Dios among the Huichol is the idea that we have collective ancestors. And it's hard to explain because, you know, we're in a trying to understand another native language, a native culture, but, you know, the words will mean so many things. But to understand our ancestors are we're not only human, they were our ancestors, as I mentioned earlier, and this is very much aligned with my own indigenous teachings as a Nawa person, is that, you know, everything is alive. The plants are alive, and when we speak and pray with them, they help us. When we take our teas, they become even more powerful. Their medicine responds to us. You know that we have receptors in our body? That's why plants work. We have receptors in our body to constituents in the plants, and when we become one with them, that's why the medicine becomes effective. So, so there's so much more to biology, to understanding creation. And so there is this unity then with humans and all the creative powers in the unseen world and the sacred. So, so part of the challenge is the imposter ceremony, imposter syndrome, is that, you know, it is because, you know, actually your humility. So, you know, actually what you're feeling is, you know, your humbleness. And that is one of the most important things about being a human being, is to go back to our sense of humility, of respect. And I don't mean humility. People hear that from a native way, that's a great attribute, because with the ego world, especially now with the social media, is to announce ourselves, to pronounce ourselves. But you know, and equality is really important. But humility meaning like we let go of our ego to like really bring our spirits stripped of all of our ideas of who we are. It's our spirit, our most fundamental beingness that we want to get back to. And that's what humility is. When you get back to that fundamental beingness, you stand in awe and respect of all that's in nature, and you say a prayer. You say, you know, you recognize, you know, I'm really trying to do better. Let me contribute that to the order. You know, that sense of when we get to that place, then we're all in that equal place, because that's when we're stripped of all these things that we've said we are as human beings. So how am I doing on time, Juana?
We are at 5 more minutes or so, because I'm going to shorten the closing a little bit to make sure you have a little time and that the panelists get their whole hour.
So 5 more minutes to talk, or is there, should 5 more minutes, I should open it up to questions?
I think you should do a little wrap up. We've had so many questions and comments, and
okay,
we've been trying to.
All right. So
I'd like to do your closing. I mean, you know, okay. We want your knowledge.
Okay. So what I want to do is, I want to end with a little bit of a meditation. So I want to just recognize that the next session will be on Black-Brown relations, and that's really important because I've mentioned here connecting to our ancestries. You know, I was one of the first journalists to write about the African presence in Mexico, and myself and my former partner, Roberto Rodriguez. It was a very historic article. So I think that these conversations are really important to recognize, you know, that those relations, and they're actually in our blood. You know, we have ancestors that we also should honor and be accountable to. And so this, ¿Dónde está tu ombligo?, is us just to take some time to breathe into our belly button, and I'll share some ombligo teachings with you as we're breathing. And so again, if you want to focus on the light and just breathe. And we're going to actually also, as we go into breathing down and taking our breath into our belly button, we're going to also thank our ancestors that have come into us, come into our place, come into our environment. come into surrounding us. And we want to thank them for whatever they gave to us, for showing themselves. We want to thank them for what we've experienced and what we were able to see, and what we're able to hold on to despite a great time of loss. And so we want to make sure to also send them off in a good way as we end this time. And so we're going to be sending that prayer to them as we breathe into our belly buttons. And because that belly button is actually the point of your ancestors. From your life to your mother's life or your parents' life, you were connected through your umbilical cord, and their life to their mother's life was connected through that umbilical cord. And that cord is so sacred because all of the DNA, your blood, all of these things, it reminds us about that interconnection across millennia as human beings. And over time, our identities have changed. Who we are has changed. Our cultures have changed. That's the nature. But we remain human. And really what we're trying to do is be better humans and create cultures and continue those original relationships when we were evolving as human beings with the natural world, learning to live in community. And it's been interrupted because of colonization. So we want to now just pray and connect to the breath and feel your breath filling into your belly button, into your umbilical. And just pray to be centered. Just ask to be centered. Ask to be centered in that continuity, in that continuance. Make sure your feet are on the ground and pray. And if it's not prayer, it's not the right word for you, make the cause, the action, to be centered with your feet deep into the earth. The earth also has its own umbilical. Everything has a belly button. Everything has a place of origin. Everything has a center of origin that we evolve out of. And as you're centering, we ask that door be open for our ancestors to be able to return to their places. We ask that they be able to go peacefully, that they not be bothered by anything, that they have a good journey to wherever they have come from. We thank them for whatever presence they made known here. And we ask that all good things for them in that world where they're at, and all good things for the sacred and the spiritual world, that it be filled with a lot of good things, a lot of good light, a lot of good desires and wishes and power, that the power be good. And let us settle ourselves into this. And let our feet now sink into the earth to be grounded into this moment. And I'll take a few questions because I see a hand raised as we end this. But just ground yourself into the earth and to your first ancestor, your grandmother Earth. Without her, none of us would be here. And without water, the first medicine, our first ancestor, without water, the planet wouldn't be here. So we honor the planet and we honor the water and the earth as our first ancestors. And let us come and be grounded and come back into the present. And I thank you. And we are we're complete. We're connected and we're complete.
Gracias, Patricia. I want to ask you a favor to please send us a list of maybe 5 books or 5 practices that we can send out to people because they're asking for the books, and you know, some more things they can do. So maybe just 3 or 4 things so we can share that. And I wanted to say that when I met Patricia 20 years ago or so forth and so on, I was the advisor to the Kellogg group that she was in. And so in a sense, she was one of my students. And there's a saying that the student is always greater than the teacher. So thank you, Patricia, for being greater than the teacher and to bringing all this knowledge and love to all of us and to helping us connect con nuestros antepasados and the power that they bring us to be complete, whole, authentic, and better leaders. So muchas gracias.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.